And I think the Arab world has not yet changed as it may, such that there will be a real incentive for American policymakers to make a change. This is something I talk about in the book, which is that what has enabled and allowed the United States to ride roughshod over the Palestinians is that in almost every country in the Arab world, with the possible exceptions of Lebanon and Kuwait, you have not had real democratic governance. And so Arab public opinion, which is very supportive of the Palestinians, has been completely absent from the equation. You are dealing with, bemedaled dictators and berobed autocrats, none of whom had any legitimacy domestically, who are loathed by their peoples, and who were, in many cases, completely dependent on the United States for protection against their own people and protection against their neighbors. I mean, Saudi Arabia is beloved by the aerospace industry because it's bought generation after generation after generation of expensive American weaponry, none of which it has ever been able to use. Saudi Arabia cannot defend itself. Has this enormous defense. They love them at McDonnell Douglas. They love them. But they can't use this stuff. They need the United States to protect them. And that means that they're in no position to listen to Saudi public opinion, which is very supportive of the Palestinians. Nor are most other Arab governments. These governments have been one of the biggest obstacles to a settlement. Not just the Gulf states, all of them, in different ways, over the course of many decades. Now, the rest of the world has seen a shift towards democratic governance. East Asia, you had dictatorships. You had a Park, the daughter of Park Chung-hee was just elected. I mean, when I lived in Korea, her daddy was the dictator. That's a democracy now. Taiwan, all of these countries, from East Asia through Southeast Asia, through South Asia, through Eastern Europe, through Latin America, have gone from dictatorship to democracy. Now, democracy is a terrible form of government, but it's the least bad one that there is. The Arab world is almost the sole exception to this, until 2 years ago, when change began. Now, saying democracy is, an easy thing to do, but establishing a functioning democracy where you have a party succeeding another party, that's going to take years and years and years. When and if that happens, the United States will simply not be able to ignore the Arab countries the way that it has ever since President Roosevelt wrote a letter, which he then, he died. He didn't have a chance to, betray his promise. But Truman did as soon as he could. I would argue that when and if there is that change, and that probably will take many, many, many years, the United States is not going to be able to get away with what it's getting away with.
The Israeli lobby could not stop the sale of planes or weaponry to
right.
Saudis. But you also make the point that Saudi buys these planes, and I think it's a form of courting from Saudi to the U.S.
Right.
So I don't think that it's stopping this deal because the U.S. is doing a favor to Saudi. I think it's the other way around.
Right.
I also think that...
I agree with you.
Yeah, so I don't think that it's a priority for Israel to stop the sale when it's actually doesn't perceive Saudi as a threat.
That's correct. Though, if you go back and look at both the F-15 deal under Carter and the AWACS deal under Reagan, the lobby raised holy hell about these things. They claimed that this was a terrible danger and it shouldn't be allowed, and the lobby was steamrollered by much bigger lobbies, which is aerospace and oil. I mean, the lobby is powerful, but those guys, those are big, real big lobbies. But I agree with you, actually. You're right. Saudi Arabia is doing a favor to the United States.
I also think that at the time of that deal, when Israel made a big deal out of it, I think that actually the Saudi lobby was much stronger at the time.
Yeah.
Not so much.
That may be true.
Right,
that may be true. I would put if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I would bet on oil and aerospace in almost any battle in Washington. I mean, you're right. Saudi Arabia itself probably, but these are the guys who care about Saudi Arabia. These are the two powerful interests. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you say more about why Saudi Arabia doesn't have a policy that's in favor of the Palestinians? I mean, given what you've said, it seems to make a lot of sense domestically for the Saudi government to take a strong position as a way of...
They do, verbally.
No, materially.
But, well...
And given what you said earlier about the importance of Saudi Arabia to the United States...
I'll give you a quick answer. They need Washington more than Washington needs them. They need American support against their external enemies and their internal enemies, such that they're in no position to put pressure on Washington. They're also very shrewd readers of the American domestic scene. They understand that one reason that they have such a cozy relationship with the United States is because they don't really oppose Israel, and that they would have all kinds of problems domestically in this country were they to make a real fuss on the issue of Palestine. Now, that's not to say that the Saudis have not thrown their weight around on issues where they really felt their vital interests were involved. Look at the Arab oil embargo. That wasn't about Palestine. That was about Cold War stuff, helping Egypt move from the Soviet column to the American column. And that was about the fury of King Faisal at the fact that the Americans would not listen to him for 2.5 years. And he said to him, Sadat wants to capitulate to the Israelis and make a separate peace and hand Egypt over to the United States. Would you please take him? And they wouldn't. And I talk about that a little bit in the book. So Faisal was really, the king was furious at the Americans. And he sent envoy after envoy to Washington saying, Sadat is ready to do anything the Israelis want as far as the deal is concerned. He is willing to, kick the Russians out. In fact, he kicked the Russians out, and Kissinger still wouldn't listen to him. He started threatening war. Kissinger still wouldn't listen to him. In fact, one of the documents that's just been released in the Foreign Relations of the United States series is a document where Kissinger poo-poos a prediction that Egypt and Syria would go to war on the eve of the 1973 war. And Nixon writes in the margin, this is completely wrong. This situation is going to blow. Nixon was much more perceptive than Kissinger, as it turns out. So the Saudis, they do throw their weight around. This is not to say they won't, but on this issue, they won't. They understand it's a hot-button issue in American politics, and in the last analysis, they need Washington more than Washington needs them. Yes, ma'am?
You say that it all changed with Nixon. What was it before? What was American?
In terms of the Palestine issue?
Yeah, American issues with Israel and Palestine, and why did it change?
Well, it's a good question. One reason that it changed is because the PLO had become an actor of importance and weight. Before this, the Palestine issue really, certainly in the period between the 1948 war and the 1967 war, nobody talked about the Palestine issue. There was a resolution that came before the UN General Assembly every year. The United States unthinkingly supported it, supporting the refugee right of return. And the question of Palestine was on the agenda, and that was almost the only place in the world that the word Palestine was ever used for the entire period between the 48 war and the 67 war. With the rise of the commando movement, with the rise of the PLO, the Palestinians become an actor. And so the United States has to, decide how to deal with them. And its decision how to deal with them is largely determined by Cold War considerations. The PLO is seen as aligned with the Soviet Union, and so the United States, and Israel is seen as aligned with the United States, and so the United States takes the side of Israel. And Kissinger really pushed that. There's some really borderline anti-Semitic comments made by Nixon that I quote in some of the documents here, out of Foreign Relations of the United States, in which he says, really, Kissinger just supports whatever the Israelis want.
Was that true? I mean, was Kissinger
no,
a major
but
player?
Nixon was onto something.
Yeah.
There's a mind-boggling episode at the very end of the 1973 war, which is laid out in great detail both in the Foreign Relations of the United States volume, which is our government's publication of our diplomatic documents, and in a wonderful book by a man named Craig Daigle about the October War and its antecedents, in which Kissinger goes to Moscow to negotiate a ceasefire between the Egyptians and the Israelis at the very end of the October War. And the Secretary of State tells the Russians, we'll stop them, that's it. They just passed Security Council Resolution 338. He said, we'll pass another resolution, which was 339, which was going to stop the fighting and start a new negotiation under international auspices, which means the Soviets would be involved in peacemaking. So the Soviets were thrilled. They would save Egypt. They would be seen as having acted in such a way as to help this country. And maybe the Egyptians, who had just thrown their advisors out, would not be quite so hostile to them. On his way back, he stops in Tel Aviv. And he tells Golda Meir, now, you're supposed to stop. But if something happens during the night while I'm on the plane on the way back to Washington, so basically he gave them a green light to go ahead.